a little more for lesson 44 because I kind of made a mistake in the last one. I told you that on their weapons they would have cannons. And for some reason I put that in there. And I realized afterwards the cannons were not even invented till like the 13th century. Well, in Europe they were used in the 13th century. So Rome, they didn't have cannons. So I wanted to correct that. And then I wanted to talk a little more about their weapons. The Roman soldiers used a variety of weapons, including pugio, which is a dagger, gladius, which is a sword, and the sword would be different kinds of sword would actually have, you'd be able to put it in a sheath there, and it'd have a sheath for the sword, and a spear, the spear and a javelin, and they would shoot with bows and arrows. The soldiers were trained to fight with their weapons and practice on a regular basis. They would sometimes spar with each other using a wooden sword to practice. And they also, in their armor, they had strips of strong iron that they would put on them to make that were flexible. But they would make their armor out of iron, and they had iron helmets to protect their heads. But they still would have to have good vision. Their helmets would have to have good vision for fighting. So I wanted to add that to you, especially because I went and said, oh, and maybe they had to take care of their cannons. And I'm like, where did that come from? So anyway, sometimes, yeah, I make mistakes. But here I want you to know, and this time, the main weapons that they used were the sword and the dagger, and they used bow and arrows during this time of Rome. Later on, we'll see when the cannons and gunfire would come. So anyway, I wanted to tell you that, and then you can add that to the armor of God, huh? You know, so we never really have arrows with our armor of God. Although when I think of arrows, and the bow and arrows, I actually think of David, because they had bow and arrows long, long before, even, 1,000 years before Christ, they would have bows and arrows. So anyway, put that in the rest of your lesson, and that's our lesson on Rome and the Centurions.